It is a matter of regret if those who are seeking treatment are not able to provide it, and that's a matter that the SPS seek to address, and we support them as an administration in that. I think there is some good reason why sometimes those who refuse to admit their guilt are not taken on these programmes. I mean, we are talking about people who are highly manipulative and highly devious, and even sometimes, sadly, some people go on these courses to try and delude people who are challenged with looking after them and monitoring public safely, to try and say that they have learned their errors of their ways, and without going into details regarding Mr Strachan, a variety of matters were stated by him to the authorities, some of which, as I say, are being reviewed and addressed. So, as I say, we have to recognise that it's a judgment call for those who have to be trained. It's an area of expertise that we are supporting as an administration, but that is developing under academics, both in Scotland and elsewhere. We will try to ensure as a government that those who do want it should be provided with it. I do think that it's an operational matter for those qualified as to whether it's worthwhile having somebody who refuses to admit their guilt put on it. The older days that you can take a horse to water but you can't make it drink. If somebody denies they've got a problem, the danger is they can undermine the work of sometimes group therapy by having those that remain in. And I do think we have to be ever vigilant that sometimes these people, we should remember, are deeply manipulative and indeed downright liars. They state matters, they admit that they have learned, they say they've changed, but they haven't. We have to, as I say, recognise to give full support to a changing matter, and you have an assurance that as an administration, wherever it comes from, we will welcome that. I know that you're a member of the committee, and it may be that that's an area that you will look at. It is an area that's evolving. Medical science has not yet managed to develop it, but as I say, as and when it comes forward, we will seek to implement it. But you have, as I say, also the ability to remind that in many instances, the Scottish Prison Service and their level of expertise is ahead of the game internationally as well as nationally.
Now, if we could have brief questions and brief answers, Cabinet Secretary. Nigel Dawn, followed by James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. We're well aware that the police are involved in the MAPA arrangements. Cabinet Secretary, I wonder if you could just confirm who else is routinely involved and how it's managed.
Well, the MAPA arrangement has a duty upon police, local authorities and the Scottish Prison Service. They are, after all, the acting responsible authorities. As and when necessary, other agencies can become involved. Health boards, the principal reporter to Children's Reporter Administration, if we are dealing with a youngster, housing providers who accommodate MAPA offenders, and indeed, in some instances, given points made by Mr Aitken, electronic monitoring providers. So it is multi-agency, but the basic triumvirate are police, local authorities and the SPS.
James Kelly, followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. There is no doubt that the details of this case shocked many throughout Scotland, and it is a time for reassurance for communities. Therefore, I regret that the Cabinet Secretary was not able to give my colleague Richard Baker any reassurance in terms of the budget for monitoring of sex offenders. Perhaps that was because the SPICE data for Level 4 on the criminal justice budget shows that the monitoring of sex offenders budget has been cut by 21,000. I think this is unacceptable, and I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary why this budget has been cut at a time when sex offenders on the register are continuing to commit these awful crimes.
Minister.
This government has put record investment into the prison service, and indeed we have put it into a public prison service, Mr Kelly, as opposed to the privatisation system that you wish to proceed. I have to say, I do regret the tenor of your question, given the manner in which matters have been asked and commented on by others. You know, the safety of our children is the responsibility of all of us. To turn it into narrow partisan politics, I think, demeans the issue before us. A 21,000 cut is challenged by us, given the record investment into the Scottish Prison Service. And if you do want to query why we are facing financial problems as an administration, and indeed all of our country is, then it rests with a Westminster administration that is imposing £500 million worth of cuts and presided over a lack of regulation on our banks that is costing each and every one of us in our pockets.
Alistair Allen, followed by Margaret Curran.
Presiding Officer, appalling cases such as these, often involving people with previous convictions, understandably cause alarm among the public. Could the Cabinet Secretary provide some perspective on the reoffending rates of registered sex offenders, and how does that compare to reoffending rates in general?
Minister.
I'm very grateful for that question. Obviously, the great difficulty with sex offenders and their reoffending is that, whilst I will give the statistics that show they reoffend less than most offenders, the problem is that when they do offend, then it can be catastrophic for the individuals, for the families, and indeed sometimes for entire communities. What I can say is that the 2007-2008 MAPA reports showed that of the 3,765 registered sex offenders, only 44 reoffended. That's just over 1%, and clearly it's 44 more than any of us would wish had reoffended. But that does compare to a 45% two-year reconviction rate across all other offenders. So, as I say, we recognise the difficulties and dangers and the devious nature of the people we deal with. Thankfully, we can rest assured that they are few in number, but we recognise that, although few, the consequences are severe.
Margaret Curran.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to demonstrate perhaps a little patience with members who legitimately ask questions about resources and about the practice of the Government? That is a perfectly reasonable activity on our part. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he has looked particularly at yesterday's conviction, as Robert Brown alluded to, of Mr Randall, who, despite the fact that he had been on the sex offenders register, despite the fact that he had been monitored by the police, this heinous man went on to molest a very young child. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he has looked at the details of this case? Will there be an investigation? And what specific measures will he take to reassure the public that this Government is taking action now to protect our children and our families?
Well, I do think that I've tried to make clear to the Chamber what action we are taking, what action has been taken, and indeed did give credit to your colleague and my predecessor as Cabinet Secretary for Justice. On the funding issue, I don't wish to be flippant, but actually, if you do wish to impose Garl upon us, then whatever cutbacks that I deny Mr Kelly is referring to may in fact be substantially greater, because you've got to deduct it from somewhere else. Every pound that you want to spend on something has to come out of some other budget. So, as I say, perhaps you could tell us where you want to cut. So, as I say, that then takes us on to yesterday's case. That clearly is a matter that I have been advised of. Will there be a review? I have no doubt there will be a review by the agencies involved there, as there was with Strachan. It's a matter that, doubtless, if there are lessons that they will learn and where there are matters that should be passed around other jurisdictions, we will seek to do so. On the basis of him having come off the sex offenders register, I know that Margaret Curran wasn't the Minister for Justice. That was her predecessor, and I paid tribute to Cathy Jimison. But it might be that she could have taken cognizance of the legislation she was passing at the time she was in the Cabinet. And I would say that obviously these matters, as I say, come through in terms of if an order for, say, 5 years is imposed by the court in terms of the legislation, then at the end of the 5 years, then you come off the sex offenders register. You can be put on automatically for life and a whole variety of matters. These are set out by the statute. The particular individual there fell off because the sentence imposed, the period of 5 years, had expired. Clearly, lessons will be learned if we have to change the legislation that the member brought in her time of office, then we will seek to do so. Actually, I think we seek to learn lessons in other ways, because in the main, as I say, MAPA kicks in. The sex offender register is simply a recording of data at that time, and because somebody comes off it doesn't mean they cannot be applied to be put back on it through SOPOs, or indeed, as I say, in terms of, as I say, applications being made to the court.
That concludes the statement. I'm sorry to those members I was not able to call, but I have to protect time for the next debate, which is in itself oversubscribed. Could members move as quickly as possible, please, to their new positions? The next item of business is a debate on motion number 5119 in the name of Richard Lockhead on the autumn fisheries negotiations. I would invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press their request to speak buttons, and I call on Richard Lockhead to speak to and move the motion. 11 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I am very pleased to open this debate on sea fisheries. Fishing provides the lifeblood for many of our communities, wholesome food, and plays an economic, social and cultural role in our nation. And of course, we cannot forget that we are debating one of the most dangerous occupations. Many fishermen over these past 12 months have paid the ultimate price to bring food to our tables. And as the motions and amendments before us make clear, we are entering a crucial phase for the future viability of our fishing industry. We are not just facing the important annual negotiations, we are also entering a defining period in the future of European fisheries as discussions finally at long last begin on the future of the CFP. And here in Scotland, I am proud to say we are leading that debate. Indeed, only this week I addressed a major international conference in Edinburgh on the future of the CFP, and that conference, of course, was also attended by several members in the Chamber today and industry leaders, again some of whom are with us in the Chamber today. Members are well aware